I'm not the guy out here saying that all humans are carnivorous and we should be carnivores and it's the only way to get healthy. What I do is, as a physician, I can't just unsee what I've seen over the years. And what I've seen, fiber literally prevents our ability to absorb nutrition. And so we end up just defecating, right? And here's this guy going on saying, hey, red meat is a health food. Red meat is not bad. In fact, red meat is very healthy for you. Not only that, the root of sin, the root of lust, the root of, causing you to commit adultery and masturbation and, all this stuff. It's what's put me on the path of questioning, what are we doing in medicine? Why are our incentives not where they should be? On inflammatory bowel disease, patients completely putting their disease in remission. A lot of people in Bitcoin are aligned, philosophically. One of the reasons I was attracted to Bitcoin, and I'm sure Saifedean Amos, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, right? He was a carnivore. Yeah, he was a carnivore, and he actually approached me, and he wanted to write a carnivore book with me like 7 or 8 years ago. As you probably know, there are a lot of people in Bitcoin that are carnivorous. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that sort of. Try it for yourself. It'll work or it won't. If it doesn't work, you ate a bunch of steaks. No big deal.
Today, we're diving deep down the rabbit hole with the king of carnivore, Dr. Shawn Baker, the leading advocate behind the most controversial diet trends in recent history. Dr. Baker is not only engaged with some of the world's fittest high-performance athletes and individuals, but also has first-hand experience dealing with extreme trauma as a combat surgeon, chief of orthopedics during his deployment in Afghanistan with the US Air Force. Shawn has shattered multiple world records in rowing, showcasing his commitment, drive, and proof of work. Dr. Baker is on a mission to highlight the benefits of the carnivore diet. He's also a proponent of Bitcoin and considers beef a superfood. Join us as we explore some unique perspectives, experiences, and hopefully change some fundamental beliefs pushed by the medical and plant-eating community. Grab some jerky or throw some steaks on the barbecue. We are in for a good rip. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for that introduction, Shawn. I'm doing outstanding. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and look forward to digging into this stuff.
Yeah, I saw you recently on Joe Rogan, and he promised to get some bear meat to you after the show, but that may or may not have played out. Have you had any bear meat yet?
I have not, and it's my fault because Joe did offer it to me, and he said he had some actually like at the studio, and I just, we just got to talking after the show was over, and I forgot to bring it up and didn't even remember it until like 2-3 days later. So unfortunately, no, I look forward to it at some point. I know there's a lot of people that have talked about, depending upon when the bear is harvested, it can be delicious or it cannot be so good. So hopefully you can get some of that to try, because I've eaten a lot of weird, unusual animal species over the years, traveling various places, but I've still yet to try any kind of bear meat. So we'll see.
What are some of the strange meats that you've tasted, like guinea pig, or have you had crocodile, kangaroo?
I've had guinea pig when I was in Peru. Actually, they call it cuy, which is interesting, and it's served kind of funny, like in a plate with his claws and paws out,
mouth open.
Potatoes. Right? Yeah, I had that. Gosh, well before when I was a carnivore, I was doing a medical mission. When I was back in my orthopedic training, actually, we went down to Peru for I think a week, and we had one of my colleagues was an avid hunter, and he was excited to try cuy, and I said, well, I'll try it with you. So I had that. Unfortunately, I thought it was really chewy and leathery. I didn't really enjoy it that much. I had in Iceland, I had some fermented shark, which is one of their quote unquote delicacies. It's supposed to smell awful and taste worse. And, it's not far from the truth. I mean, it was okay. It wasn't, I certainly don't seek it out. I had, I think over there, I had a couple interesting things. The host over there, a wonderful guy by the name of Ivor, he wanted to show me the delicacies of Iceland while I was there. So he gave me whale blubber and fermented shark and pickled fermented fish and some ram's testicles, which were not anything I wanted to write home about either. But yeah, some of those things. I've had pig brain. I was a butcher I was at a conference presenting. He was a butcher, and he was showing us how to prepare different cuts of meat and pig. And he said, "This is how we do the brains." And so we had pig brain and a few other weird ones over the years for sure.
Shawn, I'm just starting my first 30 days of a very strict carnivore diet. It's been a journey, and I'd like to dive a little bit into that. I've had a couple of good things happen, a couple of bad things. But before we do, I guess, what is the carnivore diet? What are the potential positive side effects? And why do you get so much pushback, like personally, from the medical and vegetarian communities? Like, I believe you lost your medical license at one stage to focusing on health, which seems a little bit absurd.
Yeah, well, let me just go to that question first. Yes, I temporarily surrendered my medical license in the midst of an investigation because I had sort of went from the head of an orthopedic department, the busiest surgeon in the hospital, in fact, one of the busiest surgeons in the entire state, to starting to recommend diet and lifestyle in order to cancel surgeries, which I was successfully able to do. Hospital did not appreciate that. They felt that I was better served just operating on as many people as possible. And they said they had no interest in me operating as a lifestyle guy. And I'm a little bit stubborn. I said, you know what, I'm going to do it anyway. And so I kind of brought the ire of the hospital, and they, ended up dragging me through an investigation and, made a complaint, went to the state basically said, hey, we've got this complaint. You can contest this at the state level. It's going to take about a year or two. And it's going to cost you about $250,000, or you can resign your license and be independently evaluated. And we can do that in a week, and it'll cost you, $10,000. And I said, well, all things being considered equal, I'd rather do the latter. And so I went and got independently evaluated. They came back and said, look, there's nothing wrong with the way you practice medicine, go back to work. And so then I was allowed to reapply for my license, and they gave it right back to me. So it was, a frustrating time. It's what's put me on the path of questioning, what are we doing in medicine? Why are our incentives not where they should be? Where they're, in my view, kind of perversely aligned. But the pushback. Clearly, we've got maybe 100 years of nutritional, and I'll put quotes around this, nutritional science that has sort of vilified red meat in particular. Right. And here's this guy going on saying, hey, red meat is a health food. Red meat is not bad. In fact, red meat is very healthy for you. Not only that, I'm saying that, you don't really need fruits and vegetables to be healthy. And that is literally like blasphemy. I mean, it's like, it's like you're now like the Antichrist or something. You're saying these things that everybody has been, blindly repeating for, generations now. And if we go back into the history of modern nutritional science, which starts realistically in 1917 with the formation of the American Dietetics Association, that organization was formed by a woman named Lena Cooper, who was a devout Seventh-day Adventist, religious person. And she strongly believed, her religious convictions were that meat was actually evil. Meat was the root of sin, the root of lust, the root of, causing you to commit adultery and masturbation and, all this stuff and all this sexual sort of stuff. And that's where nutrition science actually had its beginnings. And so that has been kind of baked into the nutritional science, at least in this country, and then it's exported to Australia and other countries too, like sanitarium and stuff like that. And so they've got this Seventh-day Adventist thing. And even to this day, many, many members of the nutrition hierarchy, the top people in nutrition are tied to this church. So we have that. And then we also now have, this conflict of interest. The American sugar lobby is the largest lobby in the food lobby in the United States, and they're extremely powerful. And they sort of wanted to vilify fat when it came to heart disease back in the 60s. They bought off Harvard University scientists, paying them, in today's terms, several $1 million just to sort of throw under the rug the contribution of sugar to heart disease and to vilify fat, particularly saturated fat and animal fats. And we've got now, we've got this sort of vegan movements whose origins go back to about 1944. This fellow in England, I forget his name, he coined the term veganism. And, it started out as this sort of belief that I don't want to hurt animals. And, even as misguided as it is, I mean, when you think about modern agriculture, any food you consume comes with animal death. It's just inevitable. And in fact, there was actually a study out of Australia that you may be aware of, where they looked at specifically raising 1 kilo of beef versus 1 kilo of wheat. which one kills more animals? Well, it turns out that a kilo of wheat requires 25 times more death than a kilo of beef, in the term of small animals and whatnot, due to pesticides and all the other stuff that's done to raise those crops. And so we've also got the fact now that, meat worldwide is about a $1.5 trillion industry. And there are people that would like to have some of that. There are particularly the alternative protein companies, the plant-based burger things, the lab-grown meat people, the mushroom people, the people that want to make protein out of thin air, those guys, they see that if they can capture, a percentage of maybe even 20% of that, that's quarter of a trillion dollars. So there's a lot of incentive to demonize meat. And what we've seen over the last century in the United States and other places is every time you replace a whole animal product, whether it be milk, whether it be eggs, whether it be things like butter, what happens is we don't eat, fruits and vegetables. We just eat more ultra processed, things like margarine and these, meat analogs. And that's what we see. And there's studies out there that clearly show that the more plant-based a person is, the more they rely on ultra processed food, which is a known outcome. I mean, that they know that's what's going to happen. So if they can get you to even cut back on meat 20%, well, what are you going to replace it? You're going to replace it with some sort of high energy food. And, high energy food doesn't really exist in nature very well. It always requires some level of processing in order for us to be able to even approach the nutritional density that you can get from eating, animal products like meat, eggs, dairy products, and so on and so forth.
So I guess that sparks off the question in my mind. Like I was at the islands a couple of weeks ago, and there's people and they'd been doing like this 20-kilometer swim or 21 kilometers or something in a day, like putting in major proof work. I was talking to this lady, I'd say she was in her early to mid 60s, and she was like fit as a fiddle, mate, like absolutely incredible. So I just asked her what her diet is like going into it, how does she train, what she consumes and stuff. And she's been vegan, I think, for like the last 25 years or something like that. One thing that I found really interesting is every 30 minutes during a swim, she'd need to consume energy, I guess, to be able to get her through. So I guess there are people like this lady was very clearly healthy. Like she looked like she was in the prime of her life. She was just really fit as a fiddle. And I guess in that instance, she's probably removing the processed foods. But I guess, can someone, is she metabolically healthy? Can people on a strict vegetarian or vegan diet be metabolically healthy? And then, what's the difference? Whereas if they go and they add a little bit of processed food, how's that changed dramatically, and how can they fix it, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great example, and a couple interesting points I'll point at that. There is a gal who is a world champion track and field athlete. In fact, she just broke the 400-meter world record, and she was vegan for a number of years and doing pretty well, right? And she started working with a coach who is a friend of mine who says she will not train anyone who's on a vegan diet. She insisted she put meat and particularly steak back into her diet, and so in order to receive this high level of training, she was willing to do that. So she started eating a lot more meat. And just a few months ago, she smashed the world record, the 60-plus world record. She ran off 400 meters in 61 seconds. And she was quite good as a vegan. I mean, she was still up there, but she's now faster as someone who's primarily eating meat. There was a guy, he's an Australian fellow. I'm blanking on his name. I just literally interviewed him the other day. And he ran 5 marathons in 5 days in a row consecutively, culminating with the Sydney Marathon last September, about this time this year, I think. And he did it completely carnivore, and he did it completely fasted. He didn't even eat for 5 days. And so he has done that. So the point isn't that you cannot be relatively successful on a diet that's free of junk food. And clearly that woman is probably eating a whole food, clean diet. Her body does okay with that. Obviously, I mean, she has to. But I think when we look at why does a more plant-based diet work for people, particularly when it comes to weight management, because that's one of the things. And if we think about what is our stereotypical vegan when we conjure up, we think of somebody who's skinny, under muscled. I mean, that's obviously the joke, right? I mean, obviously there's
Yeah.
exceptions. There's guys that
Well, that's
pound the
me on
protein.
the vegan
Yeah.
diet as well, as the lowest weight I've ever been.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's think about why. Think about why that might be. Well, here's why. It's because a vegan diet often very high in fibers, fruits and vegetables, and legumes and stuff. So you're eating a lot of fiber, right? And that fiber literally prevents our ability to absorb nutrition, and so we end up just defecating a lot of our nutrition in the toilet. So yeah, well, you can eat more. You probably felt constantly hungry. Many of them do. They say, I'm always eating. I'm always having to eat because I'm just hungry all the time and I keep losing weight, which, when some people say, well, that's great. I can stuff my face. I lose weight. But the downside of that is, you are basically wasting most of your nutrition in the toilet. And, if you even get to eat it, I can remember many times when I was still eating, fruits and vegetables, I go to the store, I'd be a big container of organic, whatever, fruits and vegetables. I would put it in the refrigerator. When 2 or 3 days, I come back later and there's mold all over it or something. Something. I'd end up throwing it. I would infrequently have to throw stuff out. So I'm throwing some of it out, and then again, I'm not absorbing much of it, and so it's all going in the toilet. So it's like, well, why am I paying money to basically feed my toilet? I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense in that regard. If you look at human anatomy and our physiology. Like I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 260 pounds. So I'm about 130 kilos, somewhere in that neighborhood, right? Just to put it into perspective for people. No, a little less than that. Is that right? 120 kilos. So, if you compare me to say a gorilla, which weighs a little bit more, a gorilla is maybe 150 kilos. So we're, kind of in the same ballpark. A gorilla will consume somewhere between 40 and 60 pounds, so 20, 25, 30 kilos of food a day to maintain its mass. I can maintain my mass on 3 pounds of meat, maybe 4 pounds on some days. So there's just a difference in efficiency. And that's why so many vegans do lose weight, but they also tend to lose muscle. They also tend to, as you know, if they don't supplement, they can get deficient in many things. Many of them end up with digestive issues, whether it's IBS or something. I see that repeatedly. I mean, I've literally seen now thousands of ex-vegans that have now switched over to a meat-based or a carnivore diet, include many of them that were very critical of me. I mean, they literally told me I used to hate you. But now, as my health has failed, and I've discovered that you weren't wrong, you were right about what you're saying. And so, I'm not the guy out here saying that all humans are carnivorous and we should be carnivores and it's the only way to get healthy. What I do is, as a physician, I can't just unsee what I've seen over the years. And what I've seen with regard to a carnivore diet is thousands upon thousands of people literally putting what was often told them to be lifelong incurable diseases into remission and curing them. Whether it's autoimmune disease like Crohn's disease, where we just published a case series through Harvard University and Monterey Tech on inflammatory bowel disease, patients completely putting their disease in remission. We've seen other autoimmune diseases. We've seen things like diabetes. I mean, regularly, people are coming off their medications. I mean, there's a nice study published in 2021, again from Harvard, where my friend David Ludwig published a study. And, of the 262 diabetics in that study, 92% of them were able to come off their insulin, which is unheard of. I mean, that is stunningly effective. And so, at this time, and I literally was on a call this morning with some of the legislators in Oklahoma about funding studies, interventional trials. So we're for the critics to say there's no science there, the science is coming, and all the science so far has been positive. I mean, there are no negative studies on the carnivore diet. Outside of it, there has been one study published on someone with heart disease, but it was very unclear. They already had heart disease, and they said, well, they did the diet for a year, and they said they had high cholesterol and heart disease, and it was very sort of done in a way that there's no way to tell how long the disease had been there. It was just one of those things where they said, well, see, look at this, and then at the same time they tell you, because now thousands of people have had their heart scanned after doing a carnivore diet for 3, 5, 10 years, and it comes back with zero disease, and then the answer is, well, it takes many, many decades for the heart disease to develop. Except in this one case where we want to blame it on the disease because they were doing the diet for a year. So, I mean, the criticism has been there forever. I mean, it goes back to the origins of nutrition science, as I alluded to earlier. And, but we're changing perceptions for sure. I mean, like I said, when I started talking about this, when I started this about 8 years ago, I mean, 99.9999% of the population thought I was absolutely nuts. And now it's down to maybe just 99% of the population, but we're making progress. It's not probably like Bitcoin adoption. You see, I mean, initially it was like, the hell are you guys talking about? Now you've got, BlackRock, wanting to buy this stuff, buying this stuff. So, it's, we're changing the narrative a lot. I mean, Eddie Hall, the former world's strongest man, just, I did a consultation with him. He's now on the diet and he's thriving. He's like, man, I'm 7 weeks in, I'm getting strong as I can be and getting ripped and lean. And so it's like, we're seeing this being tested out. And I think that's really, really cool to see.
Shawn, is that a common trait that you see with like elite physical athletes? Is when they do, like you brought up the vegan lady earlier, and then this gentleman, the world's strongest man, when they do go onto a carnivore diet or a strict carnivore diet, or just really ramp up their meat construction, are you seeing improvements over the board? And like in what time frame? Like I've just started a 30-day carnivore challenge after reading your book. I've been eating steak and eggs for a long time, but not like this. 2 meals a day. I only eat 2 meals a day, for a 30-day period. When people, like, I guess, get onto the diet, this is the question, when people get onto the diet, when can they start to expect results? And then, like, short term, on day 3, the headaches and the nausea that I had yesterday were pretty insane. Like I had a 20-minute nap, which is not something that I've done during the middle of the day for many years,
Well, I mean, for the average person, I'm not talking about an elite athlete or an athlete in general. The average person, just the average person walking around that has a normal job, maybe does some regular exercise, they can expect about 3 to 8 weeks will be a transition period, where they kind of adapt. There are things that have to adjust in their body. Your body has to get used to a sort of a different fuel source. There's going to be gut microbiome turnover. There's going to be cell types that are preferentially expressed in the gut. There's going to be turnover of cells. There's going to be upregulation of enzymatic and metabolic machinery that takes some time. There'll be some genetic signals that change to say, look, this is because our body's constantly adjusting to its environment. I tell people 3 months, if you're dealing with some particular health issue, 3 months is a fair trial. And the reason I say that is because I had survey data on about 12,000 people on the diet. And we just kind of asked them, barrage of various questions. And one of the questions was, at what point did you feel a significant change? And by 3 months, the vast majority of people had said, yes, I noticed my joint pain got better, my mental health got better, my gut got better, whatever it was. And so 3 months tends to be my sort of standard answer. Just give it 3 months to try. Having said that, I mean, there are people within days, and they notice, like, diabetics, oh my gosh, my blood glucose is so much better within days. I'm using less insulin. A lot of people with gut issues will say, wow, I'm not having bloating within days. And so, but I mean, to your point about headaches and loose stools, those are common, transition side effects in many cases. And, like I said, the headaches are probably associated with probably just some dehydration, which often occurs. And that is usually corrected by just, consuming enough fluid and electrolyte. That usually settles that down, because what happens is, compared to a higher carb diet, which, most people are on when they come to this carnivore diet, there's some that come from ketogenic diets. It's not that big of a transition, but you just secrete less insulin. You just don't need as much insulin. And one of the effects of insulin on the body outside of storage is it has an impact on the kidney. And what it does is it tells the kidney to reabsorb sodium and water. And when the insulin is lower, you reabsorb less sodium and water. So therefore you just kind of pee it off. And so you just basically become, you retain less sodium, retain less water. And if you're used to walking around at, whatever, how much water you have, and now you have, 20% less. Now all of a sudden you're like, ooh, I got a little bit of headache. Maybe my blood pressure's light. Maybe I'm a little fatigued. Maybe I have heart palpitation, or I get cramps or things like that. So that can be often solved by just, consuming enough fluid. And hydration is not just plain water. You have to include some level of solute in there so it'll stick in your body. I mean, the salt keeps the water on you, whereas plain distilled water, once you reach a concentration of sodium in the bloodstream, it just pees it right back out. So you've got to increase both the water and the salt, basically. The diarrhea is another fairly common thing. About 20 to 30% of the people, I think, experience that as a transition. And it often has to do with fat absorption or fat malabsorption, to be more probably specific about this. And so what happens is we have, when you're not consuming carbohydrates, you have a need to consume fat for energy. You got to get energy from somewhere. Protein is not a particularly good source of energy. I mean, we can convert some of the amino acids into either glucose or ketones, but it's not the most efficient thing to do, whereas fat's far more efficient in this context. And so you have this requirement for fat. And if you don't get enough fat, well, you feel tired, you feel fatigued, you don't have energy. And so there's some number that you need. It varies from person to person and sometimes from day to day, depending on how active they are. And the problem is, a lot of people, if they have a requirement, let's say, for instance, they need 200 grams of fat per day, just throwing an arbitrary number out there because the math is easy. And maybe they only can absorb 75 grams of fat in one sitting. And if they exceed that, well, then they start to not be able to absorb it, and it ends up to irritate the gut, and you get diarrhea and it doesn't get absorbed. So if you need 200 grams and you can only tolerate 75 per sitting, then you got to eat at least 3 times, right? I mean, the easy math, 75 and 75 is 150, and you have room for another 50 more. Additionally, things like rendered fat, so that would be any kind of liquid fat, butter, grease, hamburger grease, bacon or minced grease, and you guys would call it, bacon grease, things like that. Those things are already liquefied, and they don't stay in the stomach very long, as opposed to if I eat a whole piece of like steak, where the meat and the fat are still bound together in a matrix. I literally have to break it down. My stomach spends 2 or 3 hours breaking it down, turning it into liquid slowly, little by little. And that little by little, that liquid goes into my small intestine. Whereas you consume a lot of rendered fat, it just, boom, sits in your stomach. Your stomach says, hey, it's already liquid, nothing to do. But we'll send it all into the small intestine. Small intestine says, whoa, that's too much. Can't absorb it all. And then there it goes into the toilet. And this is the same problem the vegans have, because you want to absorb your nutrition. You don't want all your nutrition ending up in the toilet. And so, back to there was a study that came out in the 70s looking at fiber consumption. And they found that people that consume a high fiber diet, they analyzed the stool. They looked at the feces and said, what's in this? People on a high fiber diet compared to a low fiber diet had twice as much protein, twice as much fat, and twice as much carbohydrate actually ending up in their stool. So they're literally crapping out their nutrition instead of absorbing it. And so when you have diarrhea in a carnivore diet, it's kind of the same thing. So you have to kind of you got to figure that fat piece of equation. So often it's solved by just smaller meals more frequently. Now, a lot of people like carnivore because, you don't need to eat all the time. You can get away with, 1 meal, 2 meal. A lot of times it's convenient. It saves you time in the kitchen, saves you time eating. And the one point I will tell you is a lot of people regain capacity over time. I know you said, you spent time on a plant-based diet and you probably don't have a super revved up fat absorption capacity.
That was just quickly on that. That was a long time ago. I haven't been vegetarian or vegan for many years because it was so horrific.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, fuck
okay.
that.
Yeah. So, but I mean,
insanity.
The point stand is you still do have to adjust to a fat-based diet, and that that does take some time. A weekend is at the beginning. I mean, play with some of the things I talked about, taking more electrolytes, fluid. Be mindful of when and how much fat you're consuming. See how that does. That probably will solve 95% of the problems.
No, that's awesome. So I guess I got a couple of questions for myself. You sort of touched on fiber, but it's this one question that comes up over and over again, or people like, make sure you get some fiber in there, or take probiotics or something like that. Is there any reason that we need fiber in our diet, like period?
I would say in general, no, we don't need that. I mean, it's conditionally beneficial. I mean, like I said, if you're eating a standard Australian Western diet, fiber is going to be a net benefit because it's displacing garbage. Like I said, fruits and butter are clearly better than, what do you call them? Crisps and biscuits, right? Or, cookies and chips and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, and it often fiber is associated with higher social and economic status. And so we see that those benefits that are, people that have more money tend to do better with health outcomes. So there is a number of reasons that fiber can be conditionally beneficial. But if you look at, like, for instance, comparative anatomy, mammalian anatomy, and they've done this, and they can look at what percentage of our digestive tract is dedicated to fiber fermentation, right? Because we ferment fiber in our gut. That's why we get gas. That's why we bloat up. And we have a limited capacity to do that. If we look at like a chimpanzee, about 50% of their gut is capable of fermentation. They're large hindgut fermenters. They have large colons, large cecums. And so they have a pretty robust capacity, and they could obtain about 50% of their calories, or sorry, 50% of their hardware, their digestive hardware is dedicated to fiber fermentation. Humans, on the other hand, have about 14% of our gut, or 15%, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, that's very similar to what cats and dogs have. Cats and dogs have the same sort of scenario. And while we know cats are obligate carnivores, right? But cats can eat a diet with fiber in it. I mean, look at every domestic house cat that's eating kibble. I mean, they are eating a diet that is rich in fiber. And unfortunately, many of them are overweight and diabetic and dying early, and we see that with same thing with our dogs. And so we from a hardware standpoint, we have a gut from a fermentation capacity that is more akin to a cat or a dog. And if you look at what a native, particularly dog's diet, I mean, dogs are man's best friend for a reason, because we were hunting companions and we shared similar diets, and we arguably still probably should. The other thing, about the fiber is that, when it comes to calories, how many calories can you, let's say the average person consumes 2,000 calories a day. It's estimated that we can get maybe 10% of our calories from fiber consumption. That's 200 calories. So it's not we don't have a great capacity for this. And, we see that, for instance, when you talk about probiotics and prebiotics, all these people are having gut issues, and I got to do that. I've got to adjust my microbiome so it's suitable for the diet I'm consuming. Well, when you're on a meat-based diet, the microbiome becomes almost, I want to say completely irrelevant, but it's not required. You don't need it for that. In fact, there are people walking around today in completely perfect health that effectively don't have a microbiome because they've had their colon removed for whatever reason, be it trauma or disease. They just don't have a colon anymore. So they effectively don't have much of a microbiome, and yet they can live a normal life expectancy. So the people that say, you got to have this fiber, loving microbiome. There's a really nice paper that was published in, I believe, 2022 by a guy named Tommy Wood, who's up here where I'm at University of Washington, and Lucy Mailing, and I forget the other author's name. But anyway, I think it was called something about like reframing the gut. It's called reframing gut flexibility or something like that, the metabolic flexibility of the gut. And it shows that our human gut is incredibly metabolically flexible. Like much of the microbiome literature has focused on gut diversity and fiber, and it's been pro that. But they say that, look, all of these benefits that we get from consuming a diversity of plant fibers and plant foods, whether it's short chain fatty acids, which tend to have a protective effect on the gut lining and providing energy to the colonocytes, the cells that line the colon, can also be achieved through protein fermentation, through low carb ketogenic states where you have beta hydroxybutyrate, which is very similar to butyric acid. It's literally one molecule. I mean, I think it's like an OH molecule away, and so it's a very reversible situation. And so, they basically say in that paper that humans do very well with animal-based fat-heavy diets. Their gut actually thrives in that situation. So, I mean, this whole you need fiber to have a healthy gut is kind of nonsense. And I think most of the benefits that we see, and we clearly see associative data where, people that eat more fiber tend to live longer. They have less heart disease, less cancer, and so on and so forth. And that's not untrue. I don't think those relationships are not, false, but I think those relationships are primarily due to some of these other confounders. What is the fiber replacing? Yeah, if I'm eating a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, it's replacing something. And if it's replacing what most people are eating, garbage junk food, then yeah, you're going to get a net benefit. It's also, like I said, socioeconomic indicator. People that can afford organic fruits and vegetables tend to just have better health practices. They have more resources, and so on and on and on. And so fiber is clearly not essential. I think it is conditionally beneficial, and I also think it is conditionally harmful, depending on who you are. I mean, there's now studies that I can point to that show that, like there's a nice study came out last year, I believe, looking at the problem with higher fiber diets and its interaction with a particular species of gut bacteria called Prevotella copri. And in this situation, due to apparently the interaction, it causes rheumatoid arthritis to flare up. And when I see people with rheumatoid arthritis that eliminate fiber and go carnivore, their rheumatoid arthritis often goes away. And so it's, in fact, I just did a consultation with a lady who had the seronegative, multi-joint arthropathy, and same sort of issues. She'd been on all these high dose biologics. super high inflammatory markers. She's gone carnivore now for a while, and her markers are dropping dramatically. She's losing weight. She's starting to feel better. I see that over and over again. So fiber, I think, again, contextually beneficial, definitely not essential, definitely not necessary, and contextually sometimes harmful, depending on who the patient is.
There's a couple of things I want to dive into. I want to dive into your work in the healthcare sector, but before we do, as a proponent of Bitcoin myself, I'm very clearly watching what the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, these three-letter unelected agencies are doing. And Australia just recently, like 2 weeks ago, the Climate Change Authority came out and said Australians need to eat less red meat. The cows are putting out all these greenhouse gases. They're leading to global warming. And it's the exact same speech that we see out of places like the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization. And it feels like there's this concentrated push from these entities, and they're in collusion with the Australian government and probably other governments around the world, to remove meat out of the diet. And then Klaus Schwab and stuff talks about bug protein. A tagline of the show is read the book so you don't need to eat the bugs. But is that maybe just a little bit too conspiracy fear based, or is there a concentrated effort to push this out? Red meat.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you who's really nice to read on. This guy named Frederic Leroy. He's a PhD scientist in Belgium. So Frederic and Leroy, Leroy, is a French name. He's actually in the Flemish part of Belgium. But he points very clearly who's behind all this stuff. So if you want to look and do some research on that, it's great. But essentially, yeah, I mean, there are some people that are quite sinister, and they want people eating bugs and all this crap, and some of it has to do with enriching themselves. We know that there is a lot of money to be made in the alternative protein markets. I mean, lots of money, and it's more. I mean, it's quite expensive to raise meat. I mean, it just is. I mean, it's a 2-year commitment at least to get a cow, from start to finish to processing, and arguably 3 years if we talk about gestation period. So it's a long investment. It's very expensive. If you can just grind up some soybeans and mix it into a paste, much quicker turnover, there's less money invested in it, you can turn a much higher profit. The profit margin is much higher. So yeah, people are like, okay, if we can convince these people to eat this stuff and not that stuff, we can make a lot more money on it. So I think that's clearly there. I don't think that's conspiratorial at all. There is, again, a lot of the research, like this Eat Lancet Commission, who has been driving some of this global planetary health diet, which has been shown to be deficient. I mean, it's clearly deficient in a number of critical nutrients, B12, zinc, lysine, leucine, and so on and so forth. They have some people that are ideologically, sort of bought into this sort of belief that, it's God's will. We want to be nice to the animals and so on and so forth. And some of them, I think, really believe it. Some of them just, like the idea of that. The whole thought that, cows are destroying the planet is clearly, I mean, the science behind this stuff is so poorly understood, really. I mean, we're just basically, they look at, for instance, they often like to look at calories versus greenhouse gas emissions, right? They say, well, it's about how many calories can I get versus how many greenhouse gas emissions can I elicit? And when they do those calculations, when you just look at calories, one of the most efficient crops to grow on a greenhouse gas versus calorie metric is sugar. Sugar is incredibly, calorie dense, and yet has a lower impact. So, I mean, should we all be eating sugar? Well, probably not, right? That would probably, and we already see what's happening when we've gone from, I mean, in the United States, the amount of sugar we ate in the 1800s, in a lifetime is now what an 8-year-old child gets today. So an 8-year-old child has eaten as much sugar as someone ate in their entire life in the 1800s. So, but when you start parsing this out, let's talk about nutrition, not calories. How many nutrients do we get out of there? Protein, just protein alone, you start seeing those numbers dramatically change. Now beef looks, instead of beef being here, now it comes down to here. And then you start saying, well, what about critical nutrients, lysine, leucine, zinc? Then it starts looking like this. So then it becomes a, kind of a relatively efficient food. And that's completely discounting the fact that the greenhouse gases associated with cows, primarily through methane, through enteric fermentation, burping, and manure management, is biogenic methane, which has been part of this methane cycle. It's just been around for eons. I mean, we've had, you go back to, before the last ice age, just at the beginning of the Holocene, we had something like, I don't know, 10 times the biomass of large ruminant animals. We're talking elephants and mastodons and mammoths and large animals everywhere. And the Earth was not in climate. It was actually cold. It was actually cold back then. And we see that, with that, and more studies are coming out now that they continue to dismiss. We don't like that data. Showing that cows actually, particularly depending if they're managed a certain way, are actually restoring carbon. And in fact, there's a guy, Professor Alan Williams, who's out of Alabama at Joyce Farms, has done the calculations looking at soil carbon sequestration. And in the United States, if we can convert 40% of our farmland into well managed and grazed ruminant agriculture, cows on ground, we could offset all of our emissions, not just the agriculture emissions, everything, the energy emissions, the transportation emissions. And in the United States, I mean, the EPA data in the United States shows that cows produce around 2% of our greenhouse gases. I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not, the biggest issue. I mean, transportation, energy, and industry are about 80% of our emissions here in the United States. And I think we're the second largest emitter in the world. China's number one, of course. And they're not killing their cow. They're importing. They're growing their meat market, right? I mean, that's what China's doing right now. So, I think there's a lot of sort of just narrative building, and science really doesn't support it to the degree these people want to. There's people out there that are, and it's, everybody has their own sort of chip on the table. It's like, this is what I believe, and this is who I'm trying to defend. I mean, some people say, hey, it's the oil and gas industry. They're just trying to blame it on the cow, so we stop using fossil fuels or something. And that's a whole different subject, of course, as well. But yeah, I mean, it is clear that at best you can say the science is ambiguous, and at worst we could say it's completely wrong, and we're actually going to just because you think about it. Well, here's another example. I said in the United States, cows are responsible for 2% of our greenhouse gases. Our healthcare sector is responsible for up to 10%. So if I feed people meat and they get healthy and they don't need a hospital anymore, guess what? What's the net balance on that? We're subtracting from the 10%, but we're contributing to the 2%. So it's when the World Health Organization or UN or some of these Eat Lancet commissions start citing these numbers, and they say, well, cows are responsible for X percentage or animal agriculture in general is responsible for X percentage of world emissions. What they failed to tell you is that a lot of those emissions are coming from undeveloped countries, right? So if you look at like the Sudan, which has or Ethiopia has like the 5th largest herd of cattle in the world. India has the biggest herd of cattle in the world. Most people don't know that. India literally has 300 million head of cattle. Right. About 100 million of them are buffalo or water buffalo. And they actually slaughter more cows in India than they do in the United States. People are freaked out when they hear that. There's about 38 million head of cattle slaughtered every year in India versus about 30 in the United States. And in those countries, particularly, some of the African countries and some of the Asian countries where they don't have a lot of development, they don't have a lot of energy sector, they don't have a lot of transportation sector, still very rural. In those countries, yeah, cattle are a significant percentage of the greenhouse gas production because they just don't produce that much worldwide. New Zealand's a great example of that. They got a lot of cows and sheep, and Australia as well, a large agricultural sector. But because they don't have a huge footprint in those other things, they disproportionately produce relative to their overall output. A lot of it's coming from their animals. But that's the same thing in the United States 100 years ago. We had a much higher percentage of our greenhouse gases were coming from agriculture. And now that we've grown so much with industrialization, it's now become smaller percentages. And so to say, compare the whole world and say, oh, these are the worldwide numbers. Well, no, it's not. Most developed countries, it's a relatively small amount. Now, if we throw out all the undeveloped countries, then we're looking at, agriculture being, 5% or something much smaller. And we still have to eat. I mean, you got to pay the piper somehow. If you're eating, there's going to be an input, unless you can convince everybody to stop eating. And again, in the United States, greenhouse gas emissions on the animal agriculture sector are 4% total. Remember I said cows are 2%, total agriculture, animal agriculture is 4%, but plant agriculture is 5%. So in the United States, plant agriculture is more, there's 1% more greenhouse gases from plant agriculture than there are animal agriculture. And, and again, we hear this argument, well, it takes up a lot of land. Well, no, they're not. But I mean, and again, the U.S. and other countries that follow suit. I mean, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is a commodity organization. Their job is to sell commodities, corn commodities, wheat commodities, sugar commodities, soybean commodities. And again, the sugar lobby is the biggest lobby in America, as far from the agricultural side. So, I mean, yes, we have this sort of very skewed, very corporate interest sort of development of policies, and it's unfortunately human health is low on that consideration. I would say it's all about profit, quite honestly.
Yeah. So it's just a byproduct of the fiat system, I guess, and trying to turn a profit. If you can dive into the work, Shawn, that you're doing in the healthcare sector and trying to, I guess, change the view from regulators, from the law, and maybe just like the general discussion in regards to more animal-based products.
Yeah. Well, let me just tell you what kind of drove me in this position. So, as I mentioned, I trained as an orthopedic surgeon. I was a very busy orthopedic surgeon. I was a military surgeon for a while, went into private practice. Lots of knee replacements, hip replacements, broken bones, sports surgeries, and so on and so forth. And, there was a point where we were, as a community, as a local orthopedic community, we had a lot of patients that had obesity that were needing knee replacements. And we know that those patients tended to have worse outcomes. They would have higher rates of infections, higher rates of blood clots. They just wouldn't rehab as good. And so we kind of collectively said, you know what, we need to, as a group, make a cutoff and say, we're not going to operate on people over a certain size until they lose weight. And so we were kind of left to our own devices to say, hey, look, we'd had to get a waiver to operate on somebody whose BMI was over 35. So we would try to get these people to lose weight. And at that time, I was pursuing a low carb diet, my own health. And I'd kind of use that because they didn't give you any guidance. It said, get your patients to lose weight, however you can. And so I was suggesting to my knee replacement patients that I had, booked on the schedule for surgery. I thought they needed surgery, that, we would need to lose weight. Maybe you need to lose, 10, 20 kilos or whatever it might have been at the time. And I was recommending these low carb diets, and, maybe 20% of the people would actually take me up on that. But, when they did that, I would see them back at about the 2-week point to say, check on how are things going, see how they're doing with it. And more often than not, the patient would come in and say, hey, doc, I haven't really lost a lot of weight yet, maybe a couple pounds, but guess what? My knee doesn't hurt anymore. And for me, that was like, well, wow, that's really kind of interesting. And so I ended up canceling surgeries because I was like, if your knee doesn't hurt, just stay on the diet. And I mean, whether that was a good policy or not, that's a decision I came to. And I approached my sort of administrative staff and I said, hey guys, I want to spend a half a day a week talking about lifestyle and counseling and nutrition. They basically said no, right? And that's where the whole sort of thing with the legal stuff came into play. But one of the frustrations I had was, I as a surgeon, I was seeing 50 patients a day. I mean, it's crazy. It's a very busy schedule, and all the other stuff, answering to the ER and running to the hospital, going to the operating room for emergencies and all this stuff. And so I didn't really have any resources to help people with nutrition. I could say, hey, go read this book. Hey, go watch this video. That was all I could really do. That's all I had the time to do. And I think there are many physicians out there that want to do this. They get it now. They're starting to wake up to the fact that the healthcare incentives are so perversely, meted out that, you get rewarded for keeping people chronically on drugs. I mean, or you just do procedure after procedure. And it's not really about helping the patient or curing the disease or addressing the root cause of the issue. So a lot of patients are waking up to that. But the problem is the healthcare machine doesn't want that. They just want you to keep grinding patient after patient after patient, just put them on pills for the rest of their life, do disease management. And that term, I remember hearing that term for the first time kind of relatively early in my career. I started into medicine back in the mid 80s or late 80s rather. And I didn't really, I started hearing disease management talked about maybe in mid late 90s. And I was like, what's this disease management thing? Oh, that means you just keep people on pills the rest of their life. Right. And that's the paradigm we're on right now.
Yeah.
And so I just don't think that's the right way to do medicine. We should be thinking about curing people. We should be thinking about getting people off medications. And how do you do that? Well, I mean, many of these, I would submit that many, if not all diseases are in part affected by nutrition. And sometimes a very significant ways, not just diabetes, but everything, autoimmune disease, mental health disorders, arthritis, on and on and on, skin conditions. And so with that in mind, and rather than being the guy that's yelling at the TV, screaming, I said, well, let's do something about it. And so I had somebody, a very, very bright person, a AI scientist, a data engineer contacted me that had used my diet to put a disease in remission for herself. And she said, hey, let's start a company. And so we started a health coaching company. And we quickly realized that if we really wanted to make a difference, we need to have a full service medical healthcare company. And so we, worked on that. We raised quite a bit of money because we had a lot of online support. We raised millions of dollars online from people that believed in what we're doing. And so we were able to, bring this to fruition in this company called Rivero. And so we are a digital health company that is licensed in all 50 states. And we take people that have metabolic disease, inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease, and we just start fixing them. We just start fixing their diet. We fix their nutrition. We fix their lifestyle. We provide daily support, feedback, coaching, education material, physicians that get it, they're on board to monitor the labs and deprescribe their medications and do what needs to be done. And, we've had thousands of people sign up, waiting, and we're still bringing people on, come bringing off our waiting list. We've got, we've been opening up state by state right now. We're about to go into California. We got over 1,000 people on the waiting list for that. And so it is a change in the healthcare paradigm, which I think is sadly, sorely needed. And, we've got a lot of physicians that are like, man, I just want to do that because it's so much. I can tell you as someone who worked in the standard of care, primary model, I enjoyed operating. I enjoyed taking care of my patients. I like that. But it pales in comparison to the reward I get now when I can take somebody who has some debilitating, almost paralyzing, life-ending disease where they're basically checked out of life, and all of a sudden their disease goes away completely, and they've totally turned their life around. I mean, it's an order of magnitude different from then. Hey, doc, my knee doesn't hurt anymore. Thank you. Here's a cake I baked you. Right now, it's like, oh my God, you've saved my life, and I can't. And I've got people that I kind of work for you because I just love what we're doing. So it's really. Like I said, I just had a meeting with our team. We have a weekly meeting with the team, and it's so exciting to see everybody that's on our team is passionately and, passionate about this. And it's not people punching a clock and just doing a job. It's people that their own life has been transformed by this and they want to share this, or they just feel so incredibly strong about this. So it's really cool. And so, we are, at a point where, we'll be scaling pretty big, probably over the next 12 months. And, we'll be raising more money for that. In fact, in some cases, there's people that want to invest Bitcoin or something like that. We'll probably figure out a way to start, figuring it may do an SVP for Bitcoin. I think my partner is starting to wake up to the potential of Bitcoin and how a lot of people in Bitcoin are aligned, philosophically. One of the reasons I was attracted to Bitcoin, and I'm sure Saifedean Amos, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, right?
Of course.
He was a carnivore. Yeah, he was a carnivore. And he actually approached me and he wanted to write a carnivore book with me like 7 or 8 years ago. And I was kind of, what the hell is this Bitcoin stuff? I didn't understand it. I didn't understand. I didn't jump into it until several years ago when I finally said, okay. Yeah. And and honestly, I would tell you, I watched some of the Michael Saylor stuff and I said, I kind of get it now, and because I was focused on nutrition. I wasn't really like, so, I mean, there's sort of a philosophical alignment there. I think a lot of people are into Bitcoin because they truly want the world to be a better place. I mean, there's some people that just want to make a buck, I'm sure. But at the same time, I think the general sort of belief system, or at least for many people, is kind of similar, in a similar vein, but maybe in a different area, finance versus health. And I think it all rolls together, right? I mean,
100%.
We've got a sick population eating fiat food, and there's a book out there that was written called Fiat Food. I think Safe wrote one of the chapters in there, if I'm not mistaken, or he wrote the
Yeah, he
forward or
published
something.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and he publishes on his platform as well. So I mean, it's I think there's I was I'm speaking at the Bitcoin conference next year. I was asked to speak this year, but Trump bumped me. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh well, kind of got because they changed my date after I'd already booked flights. I couldn't change my flight, and so I said, I'm coming back next year and in Vegas for their little conference there, and it's a big conference actually, and so yeah, so I mean, it's been exciting times, and as you probably know, there are a lot of people in Bitcoin that are carnivorous. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see that sort of, you kind of once you start losing faith in the system in many ways, the financial system, the whatever, the Fed or whatever, you also start losing faith, and I think COVID brought a lot of people to the realization that, hey, maybe these health authorities don't necessarily know it all or do the right thing all the time, and maybe we need to be a little more guarded when we listen to what their recommendations are. And I think this is a product of that.
Yeah, 100% agree. Sort of tying the health and wealth together, there's a gentleman that's followed your work very, very closely. And I think one of his biggest regrets was when you're first raising money that he didn't jump in with that. And he still hasn't bought Bitcoin yet. But like, what's just your thoughts of Bitcoin as a monetary good? Are you using it as a store of value, as a savings vehicle, where you're drawn to it for like the proof of work? It can't be confiscated. You can't debase it. You can't make more of it. Like, what are, I guess, the aspects that sort of tie into your life view in regards to Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I'm not very sophisticated. I don't have a deep level of understanding. You start talking about hash rates, I'm like, my eyes are glazed. I don't get that stuff. But I mean, the way I approach it is I just dollar cost average and I just stick it away. And it's in there, and I just every on a regular basis, I just whatever the price, I don't care. I just buy some. I buy some. I stack it. I stack it. I stack it. And obviously, had I started doing that 10 years ago, I'd be like way better than right now, but I'm still, I'm still on the upside. But I mean, it's just something that, I think that, the thought that, it's a finite amount, you can't make any more of it. I mean, theoretically we get to 21 million and we're done. Right. And that's it. And whenever that's the year 20, I don't know, what is it? 2165 or I don't know when, whatever it
2140.
is. Yeah. It's going to be after I'm dead. But anyway, it's like, it's like, that has a certain sort of appeal to me, reading Safe's book and understanding what actually is money. How is, what is hard money? What is, what are some of the, what is it, stock to flow ratio, some of this stuff. It just kind of made sense when I read it at the time. And just enough to where I said, okay, it makes sense. I'm just going to load up on this and do that. And I haven't really thought about it. I don't sit there and pontificate about Bitcoin and make predictions. Oh, it's going to be 13 million by 20, whatever, say 2035, or it's going to zero. I don't think so much about that. I'm not a, I don't invest in the other cryptocurrency. So I'm not as Safe would call him, a shitcoin guy or anything like that. But I just, because yeah, I mean, but I just, I just do it as like Safe told me, just put in what you can afford. And I think that's a pretty safe strategy. I mean, I'm not selling my house to buy Bitcoin. I mean, there's some people that would, be, why are you driving a vehicle? Why don't you ride a bike and put in there's some practicalities that I have to deal with in the world right now. And I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. I think I'm somebody that I think, for good or bad, I try to be ethically to myself. I mean, yes, you'd like to be successful and have a decent amount of wealth associated with it, but I'd like it to come with some sense of morality. And I think Bitcoin is in my view, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll turn out, we're all being scammed. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that, not thinking that's actually going to happen, but it's just like my sort of, I guess the fact that I was kind of red pilled and orange pilled now, through other things, kind of puts me in that sort of category where I identify with people that are the little guy trying to stand up to the machine, and I think that's
really quickly, ladies and gentlemen. I've teamed up with the Bitcoin Way. This is the professional Bitcoin IT team. They can help you master your Bitcoin self-custody. Safe Dina Moose, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, also recommends this professional Bitcoin IT cybersecurity team. Their guys are absolutely amazing. They can help you set up a node, protect your stack, get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Make sure that you are following best practices. Number one, that it's air gapped. If you don't know what that means, I've put their details below for you. If you're worried about SIM swaps, reach out to the Bitcoin Way. Maybe you just want to know that you are doing the best thing. You're doing all the little tricks within your device to be able to make sure nobody can ever get into your Bitcoin, have any access. If you've got any queries about connecting to public USB and charging points, connecting to rogue Wi-Fi access points or malware-infected USB cables and flash drives, reach out to the Bitcoin cybersecurity team, the Bitcoin Way. Free 30-minute call. They are at the top of the description.
I think that's a good thing, and I think it's the same thing with what I'm trying to do. With healthcare. I mean, we are, even though we are a legitimate company and we've got a decent amount of valuation to us. I mean, relative to like the pharmaceutical industry, which is trillions of dollars of capital. I mean, we're a little bug, we get squashed, and it's just enough of us stand up, and then we can start to move the markets and change the way we do things. And so I think that's, I was in LA, as we mentioned, 2 days of shooting a movie for Bitcoin, not for Bitcoin, for Carnivore Diets, basically. And I know one of the guys was saying, one of the problems he has with Bitcoin is the people that want Bitcoin to succeed want that to do at the collapse of the U.S. economy. Basically, they said that the best thing that could happen is U.S. Fed explodes, and we just have runaway inflation, and Bitcoin saves the world. And he's like, I don't know if that's the best desire. Maybe they can peacefully coexist, and he's not sure that it can happen. I don't know. Again, this is stuff I don't know. I'm not I'm not an economist. I don't really have a great deal of insight into the monetary stuff like some of the other folks do that Robert Breedlove and some of these guys that I've talked with over the years understand this better than I do. But at the same time, I'm hopeful. So it's more of just a, I guess, try to be optimistic, and just like I am with health. I mean, I think that there is a chance that the good guys can win. The rebels can beat the empire, or whatever, if you want to use a Star Wars analogy. That I think the Bitcoin people are the Rebel Alliance, and the other guys are the we've got whatever Klaus Schwab's as the Emperor Palpatine, or whatever the guys are, the crazy
just crazy.
Yeah.
He is just so crazy, man. And however he elected himself as the world leader is absolutely insane. A couple of quick questions that I want to ask you. One's fairly long, but just if you can get it maybe a shorter responses for them. So this was from one of my subscribers, someone from the community. Shawn, in your experience with the carnivore diet, how would you address the issue of someone initially losing weight but then encountering health problems like hypoglycemia and low potassium levels? For instance, a situation where a person, after starting the diet, had to visit hospital due to severe low potassium and later experienced significant drops in blood sugar, leading to like dizziness and incoherence. Person tried remedies such as potassium supplements, sugary drinks to manage blood sugar spikes, but eventually had to abandon the diet due to those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's it would be nice to know a lot more about that person, because you could speculate about a lot of things. Often most of the problems I see with the diet are people that have other comorbidities are not well managed, and it sounds like maybe this person maybe they were diabetic, pre-diabetic, right? Some kind of diabetic pathophysiology going on, which insulin can kind of wreak havoc with potassium levels. Often, one of the advantages of this diet is people often lose weight because they just can't eat very much. And sometimes that's a disadvantage because you end up under eating. And a lot of those issues are just not being able to consume enough calories. And that's when I talked to Eddie Hall, the guy who was the strongest man, I said, Eddie, you got to eat a lot. And so he's putting down 10,000 calories a day, which is impressive on carnivore. So sometimes it's just making sure you're eating adequately. That can often be the case because, you will see, blood sugar can get low. For like people that are diabetic, pre-diabetic, or insulin resistant, maybe they don't know it, and so you have this reactive hypoglycemia that can occur, and due to that, it can cause issues with potassium, and so it's probably just failure to consume adequate amount of calories. It would be my guess, or adequate amount of food and perhaps fat. I mean, that's again, without talking to this person directly, it would be hard to say. There are, I would say that more so than anything, people that struggle with it, it's just not eating enough, or just not able to eat enough. And there's some things that can happen with that. Maybe you have like you mentioned, you get too much fat and it goes in the toilet, so you're not absorbing enough. So you have to dial those things in, figure those out. So I mean, to be honest, I would have to talk to that person and get quite a bit more information to make a real, accuracy. I mean, I still do consultations of people. I like every day, like I dedicate an hour a day just to consult with people about things like this. I get people who've been doing carnivore for a couple of weeks to a couple of years, and they'll ask me about certain issues, and we're usually able to troubleshoot that. And so this may be one of those situations where, that would have been helpful. Now, again, I tell people, hey, if it's not working, give it 3 months. You've had a valid try. Go try something else. I'm not here to convert the whole world to carnivore. I think of it as a therapeutic option for disease mitigation, and that's my main sort of focus. And if you want to do it longer, that and tattoo stakes on your arms and call yourself Carnivore Cal, go for it. I mean, that's fine too. But I mean, my main focus as a physician is I've got sick people, and I think I have a tool that can dramatically improve them. And that might take 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And then once we fixed them, then it's up to them to sort of figure out where they want to land, and whether they want to stay carnivore the rest of their life is, I've been doing it 8 years. I argue I'm still here and doing okay. I haven't died yet. Maybe in 10 years from now, I won't be. I don't know. I'm not going to hold myself to that. I'm not an ideologue about it. I'm not religious about this, but I mean, I just do what I think is the best thing for me based on what I can assess. And, like I said, there are definitely people that struggle. I will be the first to admit that. Now, sometimes it's a simple solution. Sometimes it's, hey, just go do something else. So I can't say for sure.
Yeah, 11 world records you've broken, isn't it, Shawn?
Something like that. Yeah, on the rower. I mean, I've broken my own record so many times that I lose track. I think if I count like every time I broke a world record, it's probably 20 or 30 times, basically, because I just break the world record and do it and to go into the next week and beat my own record. And so multiple, basically primarily three events in rowing that I had. That's since I've been a carnivore. But I mean, I've been an athlete my whole life. I didn't just start eating carnivore and magically turn into the super athlete. I've been busting my ass for 45 years, training in the gym and competing in multiple sports. And in fact, I've had world records in other sports that were not carnivore, and they were not, not rowing. But I will say that without a doubt, the carnivore diet has given me an athletic edge above what I had before. I can say that without hesitation, because I know exactly what I was doing before and how I was training and how I was eating. And without changing anything other than diet, I got better. And even though I'm older, and that was really cool. I was like, hey, I'm older than I was before, but I'm faster, I'm stronger. And that doesn't normally happen. And I'm not on drugs. Now I always get these, oh, you're on steroids, you're taking TRT, and I don't do any of that stuff. I have no desire to do that stuff. I've never done that. I don't have a desire to do that, but again, sometimes, it kind of annoys me, because I'm like, look, I've done this without that stuff. But at the same time, it's like, well, hey, it's kind of a compliment, it's like, oh, you must be on drugs. Well, no, I'm not. I just work hard. Right.
Yeah. Putting in the proof of work. So I've got two more questions for you. I'm day 3 time of recording with doing the carnivore diet. I weigh probably about 90 kilos. I don't know what that is in pounds, Shawn, but yesterday I managed 3. Oh, no, sorry.
Yeah.
Say again.
I was going to say it's 198 pounds. I just did the conversion for
198. Thank you. Good to know. So yesterday I had like 2 rump steaks, probably a little bit fatter than my fingers, and then 3 eggs or 4 eggs, and then half a kilo of mince. But like kilo wise or gram wise, and I only eat twice a day. I've only eaten twice a day for a long time.
Mm.
like how much should I sort of just be aiming for, like as a general ballpark for the meat side of things? And then I guess how many liters of water, and to like every glass of water, am I adding salt? Am I adding electrolytes, or am I
Mhm.
mixing it up? So like maybe what's just like a general ballpark that can keep me going
Yeah.
without me doing harm to myself.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it's hard to say you need exactly, 227 grams of protein and 300 grams of fat and this many calories. I mean, you can have some framework. I mean, someone your size, weighs around, roughly 200 pounds. So I like people to get around a gram of protein per pound of body weight. So 200 grams of protein a day. That's around a kilo of meat, typically, maybe slightly more than that. That's a minimum, that I would start with. But more importantly, particularly as you're transitioning in, um, you've got to just kind of be reactive to what's happening to you, and it's like, one is, people ask me how much should I eat? Well, I say, first thing, if you struggle with eating garbage, cupcakes, pizzas, whatever, junk food, eat enough so you don't want that stuff. So you're like, I'm going to eat enough so I don't want a cupcake or something like that. So that's step one. Step two is, assess your energy level. Now, you said you had to take a nap, you're fatigued. So to me, that says you're not absorbing enough food, right? So maybe you're not intaking enough, or you're not absorbing enough. And again, we talked about, if you're having diarrhea, you're probably not absorbing enough. So it might be that you might need to eat a little more, but you might need to eat a little more frequently to start with. You might need to want to up the volume 10-15%, but add an additional meal in there so you don't get overwhelmed with fat and end up with it in the toilet, because you got to absorb the food. It's not only you got to eat it, but you also got to absorb it. So I'd be mindful of that. So that's how I would do that. As far as the hydration goes, salting your food often improves the taste anyway. It's kind of and it also stimulates your appetite so you can eat more. And then hydration is generally just drink to thirst. I mean, we have a very pretty well regulated, salt sensing and, fluid balance system in the body. There's a whole bunch of systems that kind of combine to make sure that we kind of maintain certain sodium levels and mineral levels. And so often it's just drink to thirst, salt to taste, eat so that you don't have fatigue, and kind of go with there. But I mean, like I said, on average, the average person, giving average activity level and average body composition and your size would, again, 200 grams of protein would be probably, a decent place to be. So, I mean, it sounds like you're getting close to that now, but you might just play with, bumping it up 10-15% and adjusting as you go. And then, over time, as I mentioned, as you get more efficient at dealing with this fuel blend, because your body has to change from a gas powered vehicle to a diesel powered vehicle, to use an analogy, and it takes time.
Yeah.
And as you're making that transition, you're going to be less efficient at first, but then when you're fully transitioned, you're going to be more efficient. And then you might find you need to eat less, and it's going to change day to day, depending on active. I know when I'm working out really hard and really hitting, really high numbers, my appetite goes up. I may consume 3 kilos of food a day, 3 kilos of beef a day, because I'm just like, I'm that hungry. I mean, and I just kind of listen, and I kind of listen to how I am. And I think that's how, humans should be. I mean, there are no animals on the planet that need to sort of write down and calculate. They just eat. When they're hungry, they eat. And I think we should, as a species, be able to do that and maintain an appropriate weight and have adequate energy and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot to be gleaned from this and listening to your body. And it's not always hunger that you're used to, like that hunger pain in your stomach. It's just, hey, I don't feel like I have enough energy. I'm tired. My mood is low. You probably need to eat more. I mean, I think that's a fair statement for many people. And then given time, as you adjust to it, as you maybe you're depleted in certain nutrients and fat soluble vitamins, minerals, and as you restore those, deficiencies, then your appetite backs down. So it's one of those things you just got to kind of just play with. But like I said, it's hard for me to say eat exactly this much, because it varies, and day to day it varies. Some days you sleep more, some days you exercise more, some days you're stressed out, some days you have a cold, and all those things are going to impact your needs.
Yeah. And then I guess like for a snack, I've just received the first retail pack of rare jerk. But what's jerky like just as a health food snack, if you know what's gone into it?
Yeah.
Or should we, like going into the carnivore diet, only eat like fresh cooked meat and eggs, or is dried meat okay?
Dried meat can be, depending upon what it's ingredient with. It's one of the problems with jerkies is they often inject sugar water in it, dextrose to beef up the volume to just, I mean, literally just to make it more expensive. I mean, they just increase the weight by pumping fluid into there. So that can be an issue for some people if they're particularly sensitive to seasoning, spices, things like that. I mean, if you're not dealing with an autoimmune or a gut issue, then it's probably not as big of a deal. I think there's better ways to make snacks. I often will make my own just dried beef crisps, I call them. I basically just thinly sliced steaks, put them in a food dehydrator, a little salt, dry them out, overnight. And then that to me is because it has more fat. Like beef jerky is often low on fat. It tends to be very much just protein dominant with very little fat. And they use things like, like the bottom round of the meat, others, they use kind of the least desirable cuts of meat in there to make that often. And so it tends to be, I mean, it's decent protein, but it tends to be lacking a little bit of fat. And so I think things like biltong, which you may have access to, maybe you've tried that before, might be a
Yeah.
better option than jerky, and just in general. I mean, again, there's probably variations within the different types, but yeah, I think that's how I look at that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like I was eating a lot of jerky, so I reached out to my best mate who owns a steak bar and grill and asked if he wanted to create a jerky brand, just so that we knew sort of what we're doing. And at the
Yeah,
moment, this is like Angus rump steak, and we left a little bit of the fat on there. And then we've also
yeah, good.
tried it with strip loin as well.
And and to be fair, well, I was going to say to be fair, because it's dried, you've lost all the liquid. It's easier to consume more calories if you're trying to
Yeah.
get more calories in because you don't get as full.
Also, to bring it up, I guess we are using like the highest quality Angus and Wagyu beef that you can get in Australia. So it's not the cheapest thing that we could get, as sort of some of the highest quality cut meats that we could put into it. But I'll link that in the description. But talking about where can people find you, probably number one, maybe the most interesting for people is if they'd like to have a consult with you, Shawn. Like, where can they get in contact for that? And then also Rivero, and then follow you on your social medias, obviously your YouTube account.
Okay.
We'll
Yeah.
put it all below for everyone. But if you can just send
Yeah,
people
sure.
there.
So if you are a patient in the United States and you're looking for a physician to help you with this and have a team, and I also conduct meetings. I have the Rivero community I talk to on a weekly basis. You can go to Rivero, that's REVERO.com. So Rivero.com, you can sign up on our waiting list, and we're bringing people on as fast as we can. We're hiring more physicians to meet with the demand. I am on and I do lifestyle consultation. I can't prescribe or prescribe or diagnose people. I can't practice medicine in that format. It's more just me helping people with diet and lifestyle and exercise they want it, and maybe looking at some labs and things like that. And any of my social media accounts have a link, a bio link that you can find me in. And so you can go to Instagram, where I'm at Shawn Baker. So it's SHAWN BAKER 1967. That's probably my biggest social media account right now. And then I'm on Twitter, or rather X rather. It's S Baker MD, and it's capital S, capital B, and then AKER, and then capital MD. So S Baker MD. I'm on YouTube, Shawn Baker MD. I'm on TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. I'm almost embarrassed to say that. I think I have a Facebook account, same thing, Shawn Baker MD. So yeah, that's where you can find any of those places. Should have bio links where you can go ahead and book a consultation if you wanted to do that, to talk in detail about how to implement the diet or any other kind of lifestyle concerns you might have, or questions about the laboratory readings and how do I would interpret that. But yeah, that's how you find me.
No, I'll link all that below. Thank you again so much for your time, for putting in the proof of work. It'll be interesting to see how my first 30 days goes. The first day was great. Yesterday was a little bit rocky, feeling a whole lot better today. But I just look forward to seeing that journey. And
Yeah.
And also know that there could be some hard moments within it as my body adapts. But I think it's just a journey. And that saying you may be familiar with within Bitcoin, don't trust, verify,
Yeah.
which is
No,
something that
exactly.
you've clearly done.
Right. Right. And I think the nice thing about human health or your own personal health is you can verify quite easily. It's hard to gaslight somebody into saying, no, you didn't actually lose that 100 pounds and come off your diabetes meds. Yes, I did. I can verify that. So it's something that's very easy to verify in many ways. So that's a nice thing. So you don't have to take my word at it. Just try it for yourself. It'll work or it won't. If it doesn't work, you ate a bunch of steaks. No big deal.
Yeah, which is like the greatest thing. Anyway, mate, it's been a pleasure. Thank you